So when we look at historically of how investments did during stagflation, the only conclusion you can come to is that you need to be holding gold because gold has done very well typically where almost everything else hasn't.
Yeah, this is exactly the kind of context I was hoping you'd be able to give us because people are seeing this 7% number. We know that if we look at other factors, it's much higher. So, what is your advice to people who want to minimize their losses? How can they approach this right now?
Well, the thing is they need to look at, I guess before we could get into that, I should say that there's inflation is one factor, but the other thing is we've got declining GDP, which the two of them combined, we get stagflation. And we've only had a few episodes of stagflation before, but that's the worst possible combination, declining GDP and rising inflation. So that's the thing. And then now, I don't know what it's like where you are, but Ontario has implemented, new lockdowns. So the thing is that the number of small businesses, particularly restaurants, that aren't going to make it through this next series of lockdowns. So the GDP is going to get worse. And then we've got, supply chain problems that everybody's heard about. So we've got that added combination to make matters worse. And as they lock down economies, they're just making it even worse. So we've got that kind of combination. So when we look at historically of how investments did during stagflation, the only conclusion you can come to is that you need to be holding gold because gold has done very well typically where almost everything else hasn't. So that is more important than ever to hold gold. On a speculative basis, silver is probably going to outperform gold, but gold will be the asset that moves up first through all this. So I just wrote an article for Taxes and Wealth Management saying that the title of the article is Perfect Storm for Gold. We got all the conditions right to see significant increases in the gold and silver price in 22.
Okay, and definitely we'll come back to their price performance in this coming year. Before we go there, I want to touch on what's going on with the US Federal Reserve because when we spoke last, it was toward the end of November. I asked you about their plans for tapering and rate hikes, and you said that doesn't sound realistic. And since then, we've only seen the Fed get more aggressive. Updated thoughts on what's going on there. Are they really thinking that they can accomplish this?
Well, the Fed is caught sort of between a rock and a hard place. If they don't raise rates, then inflation will just continue going up. If they do raise rates, they run the risk of crashing the stock market and the US dollar. So many people think that they'll try one rate hike, small rate hike in June. That'll have negative consequences and then they'll back off completely because like I say, they're caught between a rock and a hard place of what to do. When you consider the normalized interest rate over say 20 years has been 5%. If they go up 1%, it'll crash the economy. Never mind going to 5%, and that's the average interest rate, so on. So they've got a real dilemma of how they deal with this.
Okay, so keeping all these factors in mind, now I want to touch on where the gold price could go in 2022. So we're looking forward, expecting perhaps a big market crash or correction. We don't know when it will come. If we don't get that this year, do you think gold then stays kind of range bound, similar to how it was in 2021?
Well, quite possible, but it's starting to move up. Like typically, the first part of January is not that strong for gold, but then once we get into February, then that moves up and into March. So that's kind of one of the best seasons for gold. So likely, regardless what else will happen, we should surpass 2,000 an ounce for gold in the next month or so. And silver could go as high as 30.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about silver a little bit. Last year was a really interesting year for silver. Almost exactly a year ago, or maybe 11 months ago at this point, we had the silver squeeze really get started and spike interest in the white metal. So I wondered if we could take a look now that we're through 2021 at what demand looked like last year and where it was the strongest for silver, what segments were creating the most demand.
Well, silver is kind of a different category than gold because gold is primarily a monetary metal with a less sort of commodity demand, where silver is primarily a commodity demand with some monetary aspects. But the thing that I believe that at some point in time, the various companies like, take Apple or Tesla or whatever that need silver because without it, they don't make their product. But if you consider like an Apple iPhone, there's probably 50 cents worth of silver in it. But without the silver, you don't make any iPhones. So at some point in time, it's going to occur to the CEOs and so on of these companies that are dependent on silver to stockpile silver for production. Because if they don't have silver, they don't make any cars, just like we've seen recently with the shortage of chips in cars. Just for the sake of not having a chip, you don't build any cars. But the same will apply in silver. So if that happens, you could see any number of entities able to buy billions of dollars worth of physical silver. And they're not going to buy paper silver. That's no good to them. They need physical silver. So at some point, that is bound to happen. It happened in 98, when Ford Motor Company needed to buy palladium because you need palladium for gasoline catalytic converters. So they bought $5 billion worth of palladium. Price shot up, in a heartbeat. I think the same thing will happen in silver.
So would you say, is that the most important factor for investors to be watching for right now for silver? Is it that potential wave of industrial demand, or are there other things that you see as quite important in 2022?
Well, it's still a supply demand issue. And the problem is that there's very few pure silver mines. So if the silver price was to shoot up to $100 an ounce, it wouldn't have much effect on mine production. Like you couldn't just, ramp up production to do that. So it's kind of constrained from the supply point of view, regardless of what the price is. And normally, the price goes up, then you can increase production. But in this case, you can't, because something like 80% of the silver is byproduct production of other metals.
Exactly. And you mentioned for silver in 2022, maybe we'll get to that $30 per ounce level. I know that's been a difficult point for it to pass. And some people that I've spoken with have said, once you get to the $30 level, then probably you would see a quick increase, perhaps up to even 50 from that point. Is that your view as well?
Yeah, I think so, because you got to break through that $40 number, which was the previous peak. So if you get to 30, you probably will get to 50.